Thanks for tuning in. The muscle car performance revolution began slowly in 1949, and by the early 60s, almost all automakers had at least one high-performance model in the market. In this video, we'll tell you the most amazing stories behind these legendary muscle cars. 1949 Oldsmobile 88 Rocket V8. The question, which was the first muscle car, has kept automotive enthusiasts buzzed for decades. While the muscle car rivalry may have been experienced in the 60s, GM actually kicked off the muscle car era in 1949. They just didn't know it at the time. The 1949 Oldsmobile 88 Rocket V8 was developed to fill the gap between the 76 and the 98. The 88 was 202 inches long and featured GM's then-new B-body platform. Unlike the 76, powered by a straight-six engine, the 88 had a V8 under the hood, which was also shared with the 98. However, no other model could beat the 88 as it was more compact and had less weight to move around. The second engine in question was a brand new design called the Rocket. It was engineered by the legend Charles Kettering and displaced 303 cubic inches. The Rocket featured hydraulic lifters, an over-square bore, a counterweighted forged crankshaft, aluminum pistons, and a dual-plane intake manifold. The Rocket V8 was a hot engine with a two-barrel carburetor, good for a healthy 135 horsepower and 253 pound-feet of torque. The 49 Oldsmobile 88 enjoyed quite a lot of success with customers and on the racetrack. It won 6 of 9 NASCAR races that year in the inaugural Carrera Panamericana in 1950. While the car could only reach a top speed of 97 miles per hour, it could cover the quarter mile in about 18 seconds with a top speed of 70 miles per hour. 1963 Chevrolet Impala Z11. Chevy was a top drag strip contender when the drag racing scene was leaving a big mark on high-performance production models. Chevrolet put together a race-oriented Impala to compete against the Ford Thunderbolt, and that's how the Impala Z11 was born. The model was very limited but highly influential with a two-door design. The idea behind the Z11 was to present the best street technology in one model. The first order was to shed weight using aluminum panels, grille, hood, and fenders. With that as the case, the radio and heater were gone, and the interior had lost all unnecessary luxury. Chevy also had to add power, and the new 427, derived from the existing 409, was introduced with numerous performance updates and racing internals. The engine had a longer stroke, a two-piece dual 4-barrel carburetor, and a special cowl induction system. Thanks to a 13.5 to 1 compression ratio, the 427 produced 430 horsepower and 575 pound-feet of torque, although purists claim that the actual horsepower was closer to 500. Chevy's making an engine with slightly higher power than the legendary 426 Hemi V8 engine Mopar introduced a few years later was thereafter an amazement. It's believed Chevy produced only 57 units of the Z11, and a few are around to tell their stories almost 6 decades later. 1964 Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt. Even after winning more than 65 races and setting 22 track records in 1963, Dick Brannon, the head of Ford's drag team, couldn't rest. He wanted to keep Ford products competitive on the drag strip. The competition was changing overnight, he said. At that time, one of the competitors, Chevrolet, had its Z11 and some new mystery motor in the works. The Mopar guys on the other end had their lightweights, a Stage 3 Max wedge engine, and a new Hemi on the way. Dick eventually designed the vehicle, but the massive NASCAR spec 427 cubic inch V8 was too big for the Fairlane. Ford's solution to this problem was to ship their Fairlanes with the 289 Hypo option fitted with the rock-solid 9-inch rear axle as standard to the Dearborn Steel Tubing Company for the Thunderbolt conversion. The EST engineers had to make several modifications to fit the 427 between the front fenders, starting with shaping the tubular headers around the front suspension components. Since the 427 V8 also had a high-rise intake, the hood was fitted with a teardrop-shaped bulge, one of Thunderbolt's most iconic visual features. Finally, after the modifications, the Fairlane Thunderbolt had 425 horsepower to brag about. But that was only on paper, as racers estimated an output that exceeded 500 horsepower. After discovering the rear was too light, Ford added steel bumpers at the back to balance the car's weight. That's why most Thunderbolts have steel bumpers in the rear and aluminum bumpers in the front. The car could run quarter-mile times of 11 seconds, and it went on to take the NHRA Top Stock crown that year. 1966 Dodge Charger. The 1966 Dodge Charger, introduced in mid-1966, began Dodge's entry into the fastback muscle car market. It was also the first Charger, and buyers boasted of the new legendary Hemi V8. Having been introduced mid-year, it had less time to establish itself in the market than full-year models. However, its innovative design and performance earned it positive attention. The 1966 Charger featured a fastback roofline that was unique and distinct from other muscle cars of that time. Initial sales were not as high as expected, as only 37,344 units were sold in 1966. Nevertheless, the introduction of the 426 Hemi engine marked the beginning of Dodge's reputation for producing some of the most powerful units of the muscle car era. Unfortunately, the car never made an impressive appearance in NASCAR that year. Despite having a powerful engine and aerodynamic design, the 66 Charger proved difficult to handle on the fast tracks because its body generated lift. Drivers would later claim that it was like driving on ice. Dodge later introduced a small lift spoiler on the trunk lid as a dealer-installed option in late 1966 and 1967. The 1966 Charger became the first U.S. production vehicle to offer a spoiler that improved traction at speeds above 150 miles per hour. Only 468 66 Chargers were built with the 426, making them rare and highly sought after by collectors. 1967 Shelby GT500. Ford's partnership with Carroll Shelby is legendary. Shelby's story began in 1965 when he designed the 1965 GT350 and the GT350R. He is honored for his work with the AC Cobra and his modifications to the Ford Mustang, creating the Shelby GT350 earlier before venturing into the GT500 project. In 1967, Shelby wanted to create a more powerful version of the Mustang. This led to the decision to use Ford's 428 cubic inch V engine known as the Police Interceptor, which provided significantly more power than the smaller engines used in the GT350 and the GT350R models. The 428 V8 featured a cast aluminum intake manifold and two 600 CFM Holley carburetors. It was rated at 355 horsepower and 420 pound-feet of torque, and was paired with a choice of a 4-speed manual or a 3-speed automatic. The 1967 GT500 saw significant design changes, making it wider and more aggressive. One of the biggest and most noticeable changes was the addition of a roll bar and an upgraded 140 mph speedometer. 1968 Plymouth Roadrunner. By 1968, some automakers had moved their muscle cars away from their roots as relatively cheap fast cars as they added features and increased the prices. Plymouth planned to develop the Roadrunner to market a lower-priced, basic trim model to its upscaled GTX. The division paid $50,000 to Warner Bros. To license the name and likeness of the popular Looney Tunes cartoon character Roadrunner. This included the distinctive beep-beep horn sound, which it paid $10,000 to develop, adding a unique marketing twist. The Roadrunner was based on the Chrysler B platform, and models were available only as two-door pillared coupes. The standard engine was an exclusive Roadrunner 383 cubic inch V8 with a 4-barrel Carter carburetor rated at 335 horsepower and 425 pound-feet of torque. A $714 option was the 426 cubic inch Hemi with Carter AFB carburetors rated at 425 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque. The standard equipment transmission was a 4-speed manual transmission with floor shifter, and the 3-speed automatic transmission was optional. Plymouth expected to sell about 20,000 units in 1968, but the actual sales numbered around 45,000. This placed the Roadrunner third in sales among muscle cars, with only the Pontiac GTO and Chevy's SS396 Chevelle outselling it. If you're enjoying this content, please hit that subscribe button for us. It really helps us out in creating more content for your viewing pleasure. 1968 Chevrolet Corvette L88. The Corvette first debuted in the early 1950s, and by the late 1960s, it had already established itself as a premier American sports car. Towards the end of the 60s decade, Chevrolet wanted to push the boundaries of performance and solidify the Corvette's status in both street and drag strips. In 1967, Zora Arkus-Duntov, the Corvette's chief engineer, envisioned a car that would dominate professional racing circuits. Only 20 L88 units were built specifically for racing, which kicked off a different phase of Corvette's racing story. The first 1968 Corvette L88 had the 427 cubic inch V engine officially rated at 430 horsepower, but the actual output was closer to 560 horsepower. Chevrolet was selective about whom it sold the L88 to, aiming to ensure that the cars were sold to serious racers and enthusiasts who would use them to build Chevy's racing reputation. In fact, the L88 proved to be a formidable competitor on the track, achieving significant success in races such as the 1969 24 Hours of Daytona and the 1967 12 Hours of Sebring. 1969 Ford Mustang Mach 1. The Ford Mustang was introduced in 1964 as an affordable, stylish, customizable muscle car. However, by the late 1960s, the automotive market shifted towards more performance-oriented vehicles. Competitors like the Chevrolet Camaro and Pontiac Firebird were making waves, and Ford needed to respond to the growing demand for high-performance muscle cars. In 1968, Ford developed the Mach 1, which featured a chopped roofline and square headlights to claim its market space. Mach 1 refers to the speed of sound, which is not a fixed number but varies based on the temperature of the surrounding gas. The Mach 1 featured a standard 351 cubic inch V8, a 390 cubic inch V8, and a 428 cubic inch 350 horsepower Copra Jet V8. 1969 Pontiac GTO Judge. In the late 1960s, Pontiac wanted to create a stand-up model to compete with the Plymouth Roadrunner and other rivals. The GM division introduced the Judge as an option package only available for 1969 Pontiac GTOs. The idea was to try to reverse the decline in GTO sales after it had fallen into being a moderately liked, mid-range car. The name The Judge was inspired by a popular comedy routine on the television show Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, where a character would say, "Here comes the Judge." Pontiac marketing executive Jim Wanders thought this name would appeal to the youthful, performance-oriented market the company was targeting. The Judge debuted with a potent 400 cubic inch engine producing 370 horsepower. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned as the company sold only 108 convertible and 6,725 hardtop units in 1969, a 20% drop from the previous model year. 1970 Ford Mustang Boss 429. The 1970 Ford Mustang Boss 429 was produced primarily to meet requirements for NASCAR racing. New racing rules required automakers to have at least 500 regular production models to compete in NASCAR. Ford developed the Boss 429 engine to compete against the Chrysler 426 Hemi, which was dominating NASCAR at the time. The engine would stand out as an advanced power plant featuring a semi-hemispherical combustion chamber and a large bore and stroke configuration. It produced high horsepower and torque, making the car competitive on the NASCAR circuit. Ford aimed to enhance the Mustang's performance image by producing a limited number of these units. Today, these high-performance 1970 Boss 429s are highly sought-after collector's items. 1970 Oldsmobile 442W30. The 442 denoted its 4-barrel carburetor, 4-speed manual transmission, and dual exhaust system. The 442 was initially introduced in 1964 as a performance package for the Oldsmobile F85 and Cutlass models. By the late 60s, the 442 had become its own separate model line, evolving from a performance package to a distinct model within Oldsmobile's lineup. As the 70s decade began, the 442W30 rolled out of the factory and truly shined in many ways. It's often considered the pinnacle of the Oldsmobile 442 for its incredible performance, a 455 cubic inch V8 that produced a factory-rated 370 horsepower and 500 pound-feet of torque. Numerous classic muscle cars with interesting stories exist, such as the 1970 Dodge Challenger, the 1970 Plymouth Superbird, the Chevy Chevrolet S454, the Plymouth Hemi Cuda, the Chevy Camaro ZL1, and the Buick Grand Sport. However, we only discussed the 11 that topped our list today. Thanks for watching. Drop a comment below with what you know about these legendary muscle cars and any that we should add to our next video. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, click the like button, and hit the bell icon to be notified when we release new content.